So welcome, good afternoon. I know this is kind of funny. This is actually my first time behind the podium after being in the league 20 some odd years. So I know Phil Perry's smiling over there. Before we kind of get started on football, I just want to kind of take it away from football for a minute and just have some reflection and just perspective about some of the things that are going on in the world. Some of the things that are happening in Eastern Europe. I think it kind of puts in perspective kind of what we're doing here. Like, this is important, but it's really not important. So I think thoughts and prayers to the people of Ukraine and some of the things that they're dealing with. I think we kind of lose sight of kind of what goes on in the real world when we're worried about football and testing and combine and people running. So I just think it's appropriate to kind of take a few minutes and just reflect on that and just realize that our thoughts and prayers are with the folks there. I think there's been, 500,000 people that have left Ukraine, the refugees. So again, like what we're doing, like, it matters, but it really doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. So, excited to be here. Good opportunity for, I would say, our team organization to kind of start our planning process here a little bit for the off season. It's been a couple weeks with the new coaching staff in place with Coach Smith, hired Levy a couple weeks ago. Had some experience with him, obviously being in the system and a program for a year. And then I would say this week it was really about information. It's trying to get organized. I think players, there are going to be some players that work out. There are going to be some players that do certain things. I think it's about what you take out of this week. You can get as much done as you need to, and not get caught up in the things that aren't happening and who's working out, who's not working out. So I think we're excited about the opportunity to continue to build the team. A lot of change has taken place, I'd say, organizationally over the last, call it 12 months. It's hard to believe it's been a year or so that I've been on the job. Did some decent things as a team last year. Had a lot of new players. Have a number of players that will be free agents this year. So we'll be busy in the offseason here, kind of rebuilding the team. But looking forward to free agency and looking forward to some opportunities here in the draft, once we kind of get started. So appreciate everybody being here. Brooks, go ahead.
You've mentioned that you're open for business with the number 3 pick. I mean, what do you think of the market right now for that pick, and given the situation with quarterback and other positions, and what things in this week that you'll look for that might dictate whether you move or take or do with that pick?
Sure. Yeah, it's pretty early in the process, I would say, more than anything. I mean, you kind of know who's picking where right now. Nothing changes. I think, speaking specifically to this week, I don't think there's anything that happens or takes place here relative to what players do on or off the field, or what happens in a 20-minute interview is going to change, what your philosophy on moving back or making trades or those types of things. So I think the most important thing for us is to kind of know as many players as possible. I'd say we're, relative to last season, we're in a little different position relative to, kind of eliminated, call it 55, 60 players last year, right, that we knew we weren't going to have access to. So now I'd say the pool of players is a little bit wider. So just trying to get as much information. I'd say the group that probably is most pressing are the underclassmen, because this is really the first opportunity to spend extensively with them, kind of face-to-face. A lot of them weren't at an all-star game. So I would say you're kind of in the infantile stages. As far as when trades or movement and those types of things take place, those are things as you get a little bit closer to the draft. You having dialogue or discussions with other teams about that probably, doesn't make that much sense. But philosophically, in terms of team building, the people that have followed us, we're pretty open-minded, we're pretty flexible, like whatever means necessary. So whether it's trade, whether it's move back in the draft, whether it's move up, whether it's trade with another team in the league, whether it's whatever it is, we're going to explore all avenues.
Nick, how does it come to Davis
Go ahead, Aaron.
Mills and the growth you guys saw now that you got more time to reflect on the season? What do you see from Davis, and what do you hope to do to build around him to support him?
Yeah, I'd say generally speaking, we saw some progress from the rookies, not just Davis, but I'd say Nico, kind of as the year progressed. Garrett Wall had an opportunity to play a little bit later in the year. The one guy that played the most snaps, or was the most consistent from beginning to end, was Roy Lopez, when he was picked in the 6th round or something like that, whatever it was. So I think the big thing, you're just looking for some level of improvement and progress from year 1 to year 2. We've had about, 25, 30 players that have been in NRG over the last, 2 to 3 weeks. So they're hungry, they're excited for the off season. So they're kind of starting their training regimen. So they're kind of turning the page to next season. So I think the biggest thing is kind of taking advantage of their opportunities between now and the start of OTAs. Our off-season program will start, I think it's going to start April 11th-ish, something like that. So we got a couple weeks early relative to maybe some of the other folks. So just try to be smart, and just hopefully those guys can see the gains that they made during the season, and hopefully continue to build on the things that they did, last season.
Do you
Nick,
what
how does
are
it
some of
turn
the
to
things that you're looking for as far as intangibles in players when you sit down with these guys?
Yeah, great question. I'd say Philosophically, in terms of players, like competitiveness, toughness, I would say consistency, grit, and a certain level of football aptitude or intelligence. So when you have a one-on-one conversation, those are some of the things you might be able to glean. The way we're set up is, we try to steer towards football as much as possible. So let them kind of teach us what they know, because everybody's baseline of understanding what they were asked to do is different. What one receiver is asked to do in one place is different than another receiver. And when you're just watching them play, you don't really have an understanding of what they're asked to do. So you just try to ascertain some of that information, try to get a baseline understanding. The reality is the baseline of where they're starting when they walk in our building is pretty low. So then it's going to be a matter of how quickly are they going to be able to make progress and learn. Everybody has different stages of learning that they're going to go through. So you really don't want to jump to judgment too quickly about, okay, a 20-minute conversation and say, you know what, we're going to eliminate and made a bad impression. Okay, let's do a deeper dive. Maybe there's something that we have to find out a little bit more as we go. But I'd say some of the intangible elements of what we look for in players, in terms of what we want in the building on a day-to-day basis, like those are the things that are going to be important to us.
Do you expect
Nick,
do you expect next year for Rex Burkhead to kind of carry the load and be your lead back, or are there other guys on the roster you might look to? I know that Royce Freeman, David Johnson are both going to be free. What's your outlook at the running back position?
Sure. Number of players at that position that are going to be free agents, guys that made contributions for us last year. We were able to re-sign Rex at the end of the year, kind of extend him into this season. I'd say Rex's role grew as the year progressed, probably more out of need more than anything else. But that's probably a position that, we'll evaluate as we go. We only have 3 players under contract currently. Rex is 1, Scotty Phillips, and then Darius Anderson, who kind of signed, as a reserve future player there after the season. So that's probably a position that we'll kind of evaluate here, during the offseason, how we build it out. I mean, I think it's, yet to be determined.
Nick, how does a return
Go ahead.
to a more normal college football season in 2021 affect how you approach the later rounds of the draft or the undrafted pool of guys? Obviously, last year you traded up out of the 6th and 7th rounds.
Sure. We had ended up with 5 draft picks and then 6 or 7 undrafted players that we signed after the draft. So as you look at where we are roster-wise currently, I think we have 47, 48 players that are on the roster. So to go from 50 to 90, probably not going to do it all in free agency. And then we have, call it 9 draft picks right now. And then there's probably more of an opportunity for some of the undrafted players after the draft. But I would say we probably spend as much time on that group of players. We have a grade that's commensurate with that round or being post-draft. You really have an opportunity to really identify some of the players that maybe you want in your program that maybe aren't going to get drafted. And there's different ways to get players on your team. And I would say spending as much time on that group of players, knowing that group, is just as important as knowing the top 50 players in the draft. So, again, it really speaks to more of a comprehensive deep dive of knowing the overall board. Like, there's however many players get drafted, 200, almost 300. And then there's going to be another large group of players that are signed after the draft. So you don't want to kind of cast that group aside. But, we were fortunate going back to our time in New England and even going back to Roy last year. Those players are going to be an important part of your team because there's a certain cost associated with that. So you have to be able to build kind of your team out. You can't pay every player X number of dollars, so you kind of have to spread the cost out and asset allocation, as best as possible.
Where does the recent court ruling leave the Texans in regard to Deshaun Watson and his future with the team?
Yeah, I would say that situation, we've talked about this with our group. I mean, we're day-to-day, in terms of handling that. So once the information becomes more relevant or prevalent, then, we'll handle it accordingly. I mean, my philosophy from the beginning has always been to do the right thing by the Houston Texans organization, and we're going to continue to do that here, moving forward.
How much of a strain has the whole Deshaun Watson situation been on you and the organization? And does anything change with Lovey being in the mix?
Yeah, I think the only strain is the discussion that you all have had about. You guys have probably spent more time on it than we have. I think once the season, started, our focus, going back to last season, was kind of on our team and just preparing on a week-to-week basis. So try to control the things that we can control. I'd say our players did an awesome job of focusing week to week on just the task in front of them, which is getting ready for the opponent. So we've kind of transitioned into kind of the 2022 season. So we're excited about Lovey, and the staff that he's put in place. So again, we're going to take it one day at a time, control the things that we can control, and just try to do as good a job as possible, starting to put together the team, for next season.
Nick, what were your impressions of?
Right here in front.
Nick, when you kind of look at what Lovey and Pep both said about making it a more run-centric offense next year, they want to run a little bit more 12 personnel. Tim said that this offense was going to be a little bit tight end friendly. What have you seen from the tight ends in this group, and also ones in free agency? How do you go about addressing it, along with Brown?
Yeah, it's a little bit similar to the running back discussion we just had. A number of those players are free agents. The only player under contract at tight end is Brevin. We had an opportunity to kind of play there a little bit. So it's a position that we're certainly going to evaluate. So I think really what you're trying to do is when you're in 12 personnel, you're trying to make a determination of what the defense is going to do and how you want to play. So when you look at the league, what's happened, teams have to make a decision about what they do against 12 personnel. They want to put base defense on the field. They want to play with nickel defense. If they put nickel defense on the field, maybe you can create some matchups in a running game. So a lot of the running game is a product of who you have kind of in the line of scrimmage, and the offensive line is a part of that as well. And it's a function of what's going on the other side of the ball as well. So I would say similar to the running back discussion, that's probably a market that we're going to evaluate and just try to figure out, who makes the most sense for our team here. Again, we only have one player on the team right now, so I would expect there to be some new faces on the team here, at some point.
Nick, what were your impressions?
Right here in the middle.
What were your impressions of Matt Groh working with him?
Yeah, Matt's he's had a unique, I'd say, background. I'd say my first recollection of Matt was the year Chris Long actually came out in the draft, and at the time, I think Matt was either helping, Al, or Al was at University of Virginia at the time. So we actually flew in to work Chris out that morning, and Matt picked us up at the airport and drove us to the workout. So that was kind of my first introduction to Matt. But to make the transition and leap from his legal background, which he obviously had a career and certain aspirations, to kind of transition into football, I would say it's, fairly, rare, but he wasn't opposed to kind of starting. He started in the same role that I started in when I was, in New England in 2001 as a scouting assistant. So Matt's really smart. He works hard. He has a good grasp of players. He has a good understanding of football. He's been around football a long time, whether it was his dad or his brother Mike. So he's been around the game. And his growth and development is really a credit to his work ethic and his thoughtfulness and his intelligence. And I think a lot of people in the building in New England have a lot of confidence in Matt and what he's capable of doing. So, really happy for him and the opportunity it has in front of him. There's still a lot of great people in that building that I'm close with. Matt's one of them. Cam Williams is another one. He kind of started in the scouting assistant role, has taken on some more responsibility. So there's a fair amount of us that have left, but there's still some pretty good ones there. So excited for the opportunity that Matt has in front of him for sure.
Where do you find?
Knowing the number of New England
Go ahead,
guys,
Phil, and then right here.
Sorry. Knowing the number of New England guys that are now running front offices and knowing what you guys valued when you were in New England, does it make the competition for players, whether it's free agency or the draft, relatively fierce, knowing that you guys are looking for similar things?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think you might be looking for some of the similar traits and characteristics, maybe going back to Vanessa's question in terms of the intangibles. But then you have to look at, all right, what are some of the things that you're doing offensively, defensively, the kicking game? So like what Pat is looking for defensively, are those the same things that we might be looking for in the same players in Lovey's system? It may or may not. So I would say the traits that are important to you in terms of the overall makeup, in terms of the football characteristics, non-physical related, those are the things that we're going to value. How you value players, how you grade players, the system that you use to arrive at that endpoint. There's probably some similarities, but in the end, there's 32 different buildings, 32 different ways of building their team. So they're going to do the things that they feel make the most sense for their team. We're going to do the same thing on our end. I would say the one thing it does, it certainly opens some dialogue up to having discussions, whether it's about a player, whether it's about a trade. Like, who you're dealing with on the other end of it. There's a relationship there. So which I would say football in the end is a relationship business. So the more relationships that you can create over the course of time, whether it's in one building, then they relocated to another building. So it gives you an opportunity to maybe have some dialogue and discussion, with some other teams and folks maybe that you didn't have as much contact previously.
Everyone, we've got time for two more questions. Two more.
Nick, the Raiders just hired Dave Ziegler as a new GM. I know you have a long history with him going back to John Carroll. What are your thoughts on him as an individual and how do you think he'll prepare us?
Yeah, there's a lot of us John Carroll folk that are out there. I think he'll do an awesome job. My relationship with Dave and Josh goes back a long way. I've known Josh since 1995, and then Dave came to John Carroll since 1996. Both were great people. They were great players. They've both been really successful in this league to this point. I would say Dave is, very smart. He's got a very wide-ranging background, a lot of diversity in terms of experience. Whether it's working in Denver when Josh was there, he worked at Iona, he's worked a number of different jobs. He's taught, he's coached high school. So I think his ability to kind of connect with people and kind of see things through a different lens is something that's unique to Dave. always academically did very well. I think he was an academic All-American at John Carroll. So kind of speaks to his intelligence, speaks to his work ethic. So I think their relationship, anytime you start a new program, from the ground up, when you have two people that kind of speak the same language, I think it's going to be beneficial to everybody involved. So I'm rooting for him. I'm excited for him.